The rain in Manchester fell in a cold, steady drizzle, turning the neon signs of the canal-side bars into shimmering smears of light. It was a typical Friday night, the air thick with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and bass-heavy music spilling onto the wet pavement. Among the crowd was Leo, a 28-year-old bouncer with a calm demeanor that belied his sturdy frame. He wasn't working that night. He was simply meeting an old friend, Mark, for a pint. Mark was different these days, quieter, more observant, his eyes constantly scanning a room. He'd been away for long stretches, telling Leo only that he worked in private security. Leo never pried. Their friendship was built on a foundation that didn't require knowing every detail. They found a quieter corner in a pub, the hum of conversation a comfortable buffer. Mark was narrating a funny story about a training mishap involving a kayak when Leo noticed a shift. Mark's eyes, which had been relaxed, flickered over Leo's shoulder and hardened. His posture didn't change, but the easy smile vanished, replaced by a focused neutrality Leo had seen only once before, years ago when they'd stumbled upon a street fight. "We should go," Mark said, his voice low and even. Now, before Leo could respond, the atmosphere fractured. A man, wiry and, with frantic eyes, was suddenly weaving through the tables towards them. He wasn't looking at Leo. His gaze was locked on Mark with an intensity that felt personal, venomous. Two others flanked him, their movements coordinated. This wasn't a random confrontation. "Delta," the wiry man spat, the word barely audible over the music but carrying a lethal weight. Leo didn't understand the term, but he understood the 8-inch blade that appeared in the man's hand. Time seemed to warp. Mark was moving, placing his body between the threat and a family at a nearby table, his hands raised in a placating but ready stance. The attacker lunged, not at Mark, but tried to flank him. Instinct, a deep-seated, stupidly loyal instinct forged over 15 years of friendship, took over. Leo didn't think. He stepped into the path. The first stab was a hot, shocking punch to his side. The sound was wrong, a thick, wet tear of his jacket and flesh. The second was a searing line across his forearm as he tried to grab the assailant's wrist. The third was the deepest, a brutal, twisting invasion below his ribs. The world dissolved into a roar of white noise. He heard shouting, a crash of glass, Mark's voice barking a single, commanding word, and then the terrifying gurgle of his own breath. He saw the horrified faces of the family, the scuffle of feet, and the ceiling lights of the pub swimming above as his legs gave way. The last thing he felt was the cold, wet grit of the pavement against his cheek, and the terrifying, warm flood spreading beneath him. Then, nothing. Consciousness returned in jagged, painful pieces. First, the smell, antiseptic, clean linen, and, underlying it, a coppery hint of blood. Then, the sound, the steady, electronic beep of a heart monitor, a symphony of his own struggling biology. Light was a blurry haze. He tried to move, and a firestorm erupted in his torso, pulling a choked gasp from his lips. A gentle but firm hand settled on his shoulder. "Easy, Leo. Don't try to move. You're in the hospital. You're safe." The voice was Mark's, but it was strained, stripped of its usual steady confidence. Leo managed to turn his head. Mark sat in a chair pulled close to the bed, still wearing the same clothes from the pub, now marred with dark, dried stains, Leo's blood. His face was pale, etched with a fatigue deeper than mere lack of sleep. There was something else there, a profound, unsettling intensity in his eyes. Guilt, yes, but also a simmering, focused fury held in check by sheer will. "The doctors say you're lucky," Mark continued, his voice low. "The third one nicked your spleen. They had to remove it. You lost a lot of blood, but you're going to make it." He paused, the weight of the unspoken hanging between them. "Why, Leo? You shouldn't have stepped in. That was my fight." Leo's voice was a ragged whisper. He had a knife? It was all he could manage. The why was too complicated, woven into the fabric of their shared history, childhood scrapes, teenage loyalties, an unspoken pact. He was about to ask what happened, who those men were, what Delta meant, when the door to the private room opened. Two men entered. They didn't look like doctors. They wore suits that were expensive but slightly rumpled, as if worn for days. Their faces were closed, professional, and Their eyes missed nothing, scanning the room, Leo, and settling on Mark with a respectful nod. The taller one approached the bed. "Mr. Carter? I'm Agent Miller. This is Agent Collins. We need to ask you some questions about the incident." Their questions were precise, detached. They knew about the attackers. All three were in custody, one with a severe concussion and a broken arm. They focused on Leo's actions, his perspective. They barely acknowledged Mark. When the agents finally left, promising to return, the silence felt heavier. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. He stared at the floor for a long moment. "They weren't just thugs, Leo," he said finally, the words seeming to cost him. "They were targeting me. Because of what I did. What I am." He took a deep breath. "I'm not in private security. I'm a sergeant major with the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. The men who attacked us, one of them is the brother of a high-value target my team engaged overseas 6 months ago. This was a revenge operation. They tracked me here, to my hometown, on leave." The words hung in the sterile air. Delta Force. The unit was legend, a whisper in military circles. Leo felt the reality of the last 24 hours reshape itself. He hadn't just stepped into a knife fight. He had stepped into the bloody, unseen aftermath of a global conflict. He had taken 3 stabs meant for a Delta operator. The sheer, insane scale of it was dizzying. The recovery was a brutal education in pain and vulnerability. Simple acts, breathing, coughing, shifting in bed, were Herculean tasks. Mark was a constant presence, a silent, vigilant shadow. He handled the nurses with polite efficiency, fetched water, and adjusted pillows, but his attention was perpetually divided, his gaze often drifting to the window or the door, his body always positioned to face the entrance. He was still on guard, even here. A week after the attack, the dynamic shifted again. A new visitor arrived, a compact, muscular man in his 50s with a shaved head and a gaze that felt like a physical touch. He moved with a disturbing silence. Mark, for the first time, stood up straight, a subtle but undeniable posture of respect. "Leo, this is Colonel James," Mark said. "My former commanding officer." The colonel didn't offer empty platitudes. He pulled a chair to the bedside, looking Leo directly in the eye. "Son," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble, "what you did was either the bravest or the dumbest thing I've heard in 40 years of service. My men are trained to handle threats like that. You're a civilian. You got in the way." He paused, letting the blunt assessment settle. "But because you got in the way, one of my best operators is alive, and a cell looking to make a statement has been rolled up. You absorbed a blow meant for the unit. That means something to us." He placed a plain manila folder on the bedside table. "Standard procedure is to provide medical coverage, which is already arranged. But this is different." He tapped the folder. "This is a discretionary fund. For your recovery, for any rehab, for whatever you need. It's not a payment. It's a debt." He stood up, gave Mark a look that carried a universe of unspoken communication, and left as quietly as he arrived. Leo looked at the folder, then at Mark. The guilt on his friend's face had been joined by something else, a fierce, protective pride. "The colonel doesn't do that," Mark said quietly. "Ever." Later that day, a large bouquet arrived, not of flowers, but of rugged, desert-tolerant plants. The card read simply, "From the team. Get well." It was signed with a series of initials and doodles, a tiny chess knight, a geometric compass, a lightning bolt. These small, strange tokens from a hidden world felt more significant than any official document. During a late-night session when the pain made sleep impossible, Mark finally opened up. In hushed tones, he spoke not of missions, but of brothers lost, of the unbearable weight of command decisions, of the disconnect between the world he operated in and the one he came home to. Leo realized the 3 knives had severed more than his flesh. They had cut through the wall Mark had built around his secret life. He was now, inexplicably, inside. Months passed. The physical wounds knit into thick, ropey scars, a permanent map of the night on Leo's skin. The psychological scars were more subtle. He startled at sudden movements, avoided crowded pubs, and sometimes woke from dreams filled with the sound of tearing fabric. But he was healing. He used the funds from the colonel to take time off, to see a therapist who specialized in trauma. Mark had returned to duty, but their contact was different. Brief, secure video calls from locations Mark couldn't name. Postcards with cryptic notes. A package arrived for Leo's birthday containing a high-quality, multi-tool knife. The accompanying note from Mark read, "Hope you never need it. But if you do, you know how to step up." It was a dark joke, but it was also an acknowledgement, a sharing of the tribe's tools. Then, one sunny autumn afternoon, a formal letter arrived on heavy, embossed stationery. It was an invitation from the United States Army Special Operations Command. They were holding a small, private award ceremony at a base overseas. The invitation was for Mr. Leo Carter, guest of Sergeant Major Mark R. The nature of the award was unspecified. With a mix of trepidation and curiosity, Leo made the trip. He was met at a nondescript military airfield by a polite young soldier and driven through a sprawling, secure base. The ceremony was not in a grand hall, but in a simple conference room. The attendees were few. Colonel James, a few other stern-faced men, and women in uniform, Mark in his dress greens, looking more nervous than Leo had ever seen him, and about a dozen other operators, Mark's team. They were an assortment of ages and sizes, but they shared the same quiet, observant intensity, the same relaxed readiness. Colonel James took the podium. He spoke briefly about service, sacrifice, and the bonds that extend beyond the uniform. Then he turned to Leo. "Civilian courage is a different breed," he said. "It is unplanned, uncompensated, and born of pure human decency. By intervening, Mr. Carter not only saved the life of a valued soldier, but also protected the integrity of an ongoing operation and innocent civilians. His actions, while not under our command, embodied the ethos we strive for." He then called Mark forward. Mark stood before Leo, and in front of his brothers in arms, his voice was thick with emotion. "You were always my best friend," he said. "Now, to me and to these men, you're more. You're a guardian. You didn't wear the badge, but you bore the blade." He then pinned a small, exquisite medal to Leo's jacket lapel. It was the Civilian Award for Humanitarian Service, but it had been modified. Behind the medal was a tiny, polished silver tab, engraved with the unit's emblem. Leo was speechless. He looked out at the room, at the faces of these warriors who had welcomed him into their sanctum with solemn respect. He had stepped in front of a knife for his friend. In return, he had been given a glimpse into a world of shadows and absolutes, and had been granted its highest token of acceptance. The man with the knife had taken a piece of his body. These men, and his friend, had given him something else entirely, a profound, unbreakable connection, and the silent, staggering knowledge that his moment of instinctive bravery had resonated in a world where bravery was the daily currency. He simply nodded, his hand closing over the cool metal on his chest, unable to form a single word.